Laura had always been a woman who craved excitement. Her life with George, her husband of 10 years, had become predictable and mundane. The thrill she once felt with him had faded, replaced by the routine of daily life. The same old dinners, the predictable conversations, and the monotonous routine of work and home left her yearning for something more. That was until she met Marcus, a striking man with a commanding presence and an air of danger that excited her. It all began innocently enough. Laura met Marcus at a friend's party. He was the life of the gathering, effortlessly drawing people into his orbit with his charisma and confidence. Laura found herself captivated by his intense gaze and the way he seemed to own every room he entered. Their first conversation was electrifying. His flirtatious banter and bold compliments made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. Every weekend, Laura would make up an excuse to leave the house. She would tell George she was going to visit her sister or spend the day shopping with friends. In reality, she was meeting Marcus at their usual motel, a shabby but discreet place just outside of town. It wasn't love that drew her to him. It was his physical prowess. Marcus had a raw, animalistic magnetism that George lacked. His touch ignited a fire within her, and their encounters were a blend of passion and reckless abandon. Laura loved the thrill, the wild nights, and the sense of control she felt when she was with him. Each rendezvous was a carefully orchestrated escape from her ordinary life. She would spend hours getting ready, choosing the perfect outfit, and imagining the wild night ahead. The anticipation itself was intoxicating. As she drove to the motel, her heart would race, and a wicked smile would spread across her face. Their encounters were anything but ordinary. Marcus had a way of making every moment feel like an adventure. They would sometimes meet in different motels, each with its own unique charm. He would blindfold her and lead her into the room, heightening her senses and anticipation. The nights were filled with laughter, passion, and a sense of danger that kept Laura coming back for more. To Laura, everything seemed perfect. She believed she had everything under control and that her husband, George, would never suspect a thing. She relished in the secrecy and the double life she was leading. Laura meticulously covered her tracks, ensuring that no one would ever find out about her affair. She would delete messages, pay in cash, and keep their trysts away from prying eyes. As she drove back home from another exhilarating night with Marcus, she couldn't help but smile, feeling invincible and untouchable. The thrill of the affair gave her a sense of empowerment that was addictive. She felt like she was living a secret fantasy, a life that was entirely her own. George's obliviousness to her double life only added to the excitement. In those moments, she convinced herself that she deserved this. She rationalized her actions, telling herself that a little excitement was harmless. After all, she was just reclaiming a piece of herself that had been lost in the monotony of marriage. Laura's weekend escapades became the highlight of her life, a secret indulgence that kept her spirit alive. But as she pulled into the driveway and saw the familiar sight of her home, a pang of guilt would momentarily flicker in her chest. She would brush it aside, convincing herself that what George didn't know couldn't hurt him. Laura believed she had mastered the art of deception and that her perfect life could continue indefinitely. Little did she know, the carefully constructed facade was about to come crashing down, and the thrill she so desperately sought would lead to consequences she could never have imagined. After another wild night with Marcus, Laura returned home, feeling invincible. The previous evening had been a whirlwind of passion and excitement, and the lingering thrill made her feel untouchable. She drove through the quiet suburban streets, her mind replaying the night's events with a self-satisfied smile on her lips. As she approached her front door, she noticed something unusual. The door was slightly ajar. A sense of unease began to creep over her, but she brushed it aside. Perhaps George had simply forgotten to close it properly. She pushed the door open, stepping inside, only to be confronted by an unexpected sight. Standing in her living room was a woman she had never met before. The living room was eerily silent. The usual sounds of the television or George's tinkering in the garage were absent. The air felt thick with tension, and Laura's heart skipped a beat as she took in the scene before her. The woman, tall and statuesque, with a stern expression, stood confidently in the center of the room. Her eyes bore into Laura with a mixture of contempt and satisfaction. Laura's eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of George. The woman's presence was unsettling, and the silence only added to the ominous atmosphere. "Who are you?" Laura demanded, trying to mask her growing unease with a tone of authority. The woman's lips curled into a smug smile. "I'm Vanessa," she replied, her voice cold and steady. "Marcus's wife." Laura's heart plummeted. She had known Marcus was married, but he had always assured her that his wife was clueless about their affair. The look in Vanessa's eyes told a different story. Laura's mind raced, trying to piece together how this stranger had ended up in her home. Vanessa took a step closer, her eyes never leaving Laura's. "Imagine my surprise when I found out my husband wasn't the only one cheating," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your husband, George, and I have been talking. He knows everything." Laura's blood ran cold. The confident facade she had maintained for so long began to crack. "Where is George?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Vanessa pointed to a stack of papers on the coffee table. "He left you these," she said. Laura moved cautiously to the table, her hands shaking as she picked up the documents. "Divorce papers." Her eyes skimmed over the pages, the words blurring together in her panic. Vanessa's voice cut through the fog of Laura's thoughts. "Your husband and I have decided to make things easier for everyone involved. He's with Marcus now, discussing the details of our new living arrangements." Laura looked up, confusion and fear etched on her face. "New living arrangements?" Vanessa's smile widened. "Yes. You see, your husband and I are moving in together. He's finally realized what a lying, cheating woman you are. And now, he's taking everything from you." Laura's legs felt like jelly, and she sank onto the couch, the weight of Vanessa's words crushing her. How had everything spiraled out of control so quickly? She had always believed she was the one in control, the one who held all the cards. Now, she realized just how wrong she had been. Vanessa walked over to the door, pausing to look back at Laura one last time. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice taking on a sinister edge. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small package, tossing it onto the couch beside Laura. "A gift from your husband." Laura stared at the package, dread pooling in her stomach. Vanessa left without another word, the door clicking shut behind her. Laura's hands shook as she opened the package, revealing a meticulously prepared dossier. Photos, videos, notes, all documenting her affair with Marcus in excruciating detail. Her secret life, exposed in full color. As Laura sat there, her world collapsing around her, the full magnitude of George's betrayal dawned on her. He had known all along. He had been preparing for this moment for years, documenting every deceitful move she made. Laura's invincible facade shattered completely, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone and vulnerable. The woman, with a smug smile on her face, looked Laura up and down. "Bitch," she began, her voice dripping with contempt, "here are your divorce papers." She tossed a stack of documents at Laura's feet. "Your hubby is mine now. I live here. Get out." Laura was stunned, unable to comprehend what was happening. The woman handed her a package. "This is from your husband," she said before turning her back on Laura. Laura stood frozen, her mind racing to make sense of the situation. The woman's words echoed in her head, each syllable a dagger to her heart. She bent down, her hands trembling, to pick up the papers. As she scanned the documents, the reality of her situation began to sink in. George had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and infidelity. The package in her hand felt heavy with foreboding. The woman, Vanessa, walked around the living room with a sense of ownership, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Laura's shock slowly transformed into anger. "Who do you think you are?" Laura spat, her voice shaking. "You can't just come in here and take over my life." Vanessa laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "Oh, but I can," she replied. "George and I have been planning this for a long time. He knows all about your little affair with Marcus. Every detail." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You've underestimated him, Laura. He's not the clueless husband you thought he was." Laura's mind reeled. How could George have known? She had been so careful, so meticulous. Her thoughts flashed back to every secret meeting, every lie she had told. She felt a wave of nausea as the full extent of George's betrayal hit her. He had been preparing for this moment for years, meticulously gathering evidence, waiting for the perfect time to strike. She looked at Vanessa, who was now lounging on the couch, a picture of calm confidence. "Why are you doing this?" Laura demanded, her voice rising. "What do you get out of it?" Vanessa's smile widened. "Revenge for one," she said. "Marcus thought he could cheat on me and get away with it. But more than that, George and I have found something in each other that we were missing. We both deserve better than the likes of you and Marcus." Laura's legs felt weak, and she sank into a chair, the divorce papers clutched in her hands. Her mind raced with questions, fears, and regrets. The package in her lap seemed to grow heavier by the second. She hesitated, then slowly unwrapped it, revealing a meticulously prepared dossier. Photos, videos, notes, all documenting her affair with Marcus in excruciating detail. Her secret life, exposed in full color. Each photo was a punch to the gut, each note a reminder of her deceit. Laura's vision blurred with tears as she realized the full extent of George's betrayal. He had been watching her, documenting her every move, and now he was using that evidence to destroy her life. She felt a deep, gnawing sense of guilt and shame, but also a burning anger at the man who had orchestrated her downfall. Vanessa stood up, her eyes cold and unyielding. "You have until the end of the week to pack your things and leave," she said. "George has already moved his stuff out. This house is mine now." Laura's anger flared. "You can't do this," she protested. "This is my home. I have rights." Vanessa stepped closer, her voice low and menacing. "You gave up those rights the moment you decided to cheat on your husband. Now, get out of my sight." Laura's hands shook as she clutched the divorce papers and the dossier. The realization of her ruined life settled heavily on her shoulders. She had thought she was in control, but now she saw how thoroughly she had been outmaneuvered. George had played the long game, and she had fallen right into his trap. As Vanessa left the room, Laura stared at the damning evidence in front of her. She had lost everything: her husband, her home, her dignity. The thrill of the affair had turned into a nightmare, and she was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. Laura, her hands trembling, opened the package. Inside, she found a meticulously prepared dossier. It contained photos, videos, and notes detailing her every rendezvous with Marcus. There were even recordings of her phone conversations. Laura's heart raced as she realized the extent of George's knowledge. He had been preparing for this moment for years, documenting every betrayal, every lie. The realization hit Laura like a ton of bricks. George had known about her affair all along. He had played the long game, gathering evidence and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Laura's mind flashed back to moments that now seemed glaringly obvious. The times George had asked about her plans with an unusual interest, the questions about her sister she thought were mere curiosity. He had been setting the trap, and she had walked right into it. The photos showed her and Marcus in various states of intimacy, at the motel, in Marcus's car, even during their quick, stolen moments in public places. Each image was time-stamped, methodically organized, and accompanied by detailed notes. Laura's face burned with humiliation. She flipped through the dossier, her fingers trembling as she came across the recordings. She could hear her own voice, the illicit whispers, the promises she made to Marcus, the lies she told George. It was all there, captured with chilling precision. Laura's thoughts spiraled. How had she been so blind? She remembered the subtle changes in George's behavior over the past year. The way he had started staying late at work, the increased distance between them, and the cold, analytical glances he sometimes gave her. She had dismissed it all, too wrapped up in her own desires to see the truth. George had been watching, waiting, and now he had sprung his trap. As she sat there, engulfed in the evidence of her deceit, Laura's mind raced to find a way out. She knew she had to talk to George, to somehow make him understand, but the weight of his betrayal was overwhelming. He had outsmarted her in every possible way, and now she was left with nothing but the cold reality of her actions. The house felt like a stranger's home. Every corner seemed to whisper of her betrayal. The pictures on the walls, the furniture they had picked out together, all felt like mocking reminders of the life she had shattered. Laura clutched the dossier to her chest, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and desperation. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from George. With shaking hands, she opened it. The message was brief and to the point. "I hope you've seen what I've left for you. Consider this my final goodbye. I'll be in touch with the lawyers." Laura's vision blurred with tears. She had lost everything, her husband, her home, and the life they had built together. The reality of her situation crashed down on her with relentless force. She was alone, facing the consequences of her actions, with no one to blame but herself. Desperation clawed at her. She picked up her phone and dialed George's number, her hands shaking so much she could barely hold the device. The call went straight to voicemail. "George, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "We need to talk. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how far things had gone. Please, just call me back." The silence that followed was deafening. Laura slumped back in her chair, her mind a whirlwind of regret and despair. She knew that George might never forgive her, that their marriage was beyond repair. But she had to try. She had to find a way to make things right, to salvage whatever was left of their shattered lives. The door to her future had been slammed shut, leaving her to face the harsh reality of her choices. As she sat there, surrounded by the damning evidence of her infidelity, Laura realized that the thrill of the affair had not been worth the cost. She had lost everything, and now she had to live with the consequences. As Laura sank to the floor, overwhelmed by the realization of her husband's revenge, the pieces began to fall into place. George had orchestrated everything. The mysterious woman was Marcus's wife, who had joined forces with George to expose the affair. Laura's life, once so carefully controlled, was now unraveling before her eyes. Her thoughts were a chaotic swirl of regret, fear, and betrayal. She had underestimated George, believing him to be oblivious and unassuming. Now, she saw him for what he truly was, a man scorned and determined to reclaim his life and dignity. The dossier contained not only evidence of her infidelity but also detailed plans for the future, ensuring Laura would be left with nothing. Laura's mind raced back to the past few months. She remembered the coldness in George's eyes when he looked at her, the calculated distance he maintained. She had chalked it up to his busy work schedule and the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. But now, she realized he had been meticulously planning his revenge, step by step. Every late-night meeting, every secret rendezvous, had been a part of his intricate scheme to bring her down. Vanessa's presence in their home was the final twist of the knife. George had not only exposed Laura's infidelity, but had done so in the most humiliating way possible. He had invited Marcus's wife into their home, giving her the power to cast Laura out. The smug satisfaction on Vanessa's face was a clear indication of her complicity in George's plan. Laura clutched the divorce papers, her vision blurring with tears. The legal jargon seemed to taunt her. Irreconcilable differences and infidelity. It was all there, laid out in black and white. She was about to lose everything she held dear: her husband, her home, her social standing. The house, which she had lovingly decorated over the years, now felt alien and hostile. Every item seemed to mock her, reminding her of the life she had thrown away. Desperation clawed at her insides. Laura knew she had to confront George, to plead for mercy. She grabbed her phone and dialed his number, each ring feeling like an eternity. But once again, it went straight to voicemail. She left a desperate message, her voice cracking with emotion. "George, please. We need to talk. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Please call me back." As the silence of the house closed in around her, Laura felt a growing sense of dread. She knew George well enough to understand that this was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. He had planned this meticulously, and he was not going to back down easily. The realization that she was truly alone sank in, and she felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. She turned her attention back to the dossier, hoping to find some clue, some way to salvage the situation. As she flipped through the pages, She saw detailed financial records, showing that George had been systematically moving assets out of their joint accounts. He had transferred money to accounts she had no access to, ensuring that she would be left with nothing. The future he had planned for her was one of financial ruin and social disgrace. In a moment of clarity, Laura realized that Marcus had never been worth this. He had been a distraction, a thrill, but he was not worth losing everything she had built with George. The affair, which had seemed so exciting and liberating, now felt like the ultimate foolishness. She had traded stability and love for a fleeting moment of excitement, and the cost was more than she could bear. Laura's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. She opened it to find a process server standing there, handing her more legal documents. As she signed for them, she felt a sense of finality. The papers detailed the division of assets, the terms of the divorce, and the fact that George would retain full custody of their children. She was being cut out of their lives entirely. As the process server left, Laura sank to the floor once more, the weight of her mistakes crashing down on her. She had underestimated George's resolve, and now she was paying the price. The thrill of the affair had led her to this moment, and she was left to face the consequences alone. Laura was left with nothing. Her marriage was over. Her home was no longer hers, and her reputation was shattered. George had taken everything from her, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. The thrill of the affair had cost her everything, and now, she was left to pick up the pieces of her broken life. She wandered through the empty house, memories of happier times haunting her. The rooms felt cold and unwelcoming, stripped of the warmth they once held. The walls, once adorned with family photos and mementos of their life together, now seemed barren and accusing. Laura's footsteps echoed hollowly as she moved from room to room, each one a reminder of what she had lost. The living room, where they had spent countless evenings together, now felt like a stranger's space. The couch where they had cuddled, the coffee table covered with magazines and remote controls, all felt like artifacts from another life. She remembered the nights they had stayed up late talking, sharing their dreams and fears. It was hard to reconcile those memories with the cold reality of her current situation. The kitchen, once the heart of their home, was now a place of painful memories. She had loved cooking for George, trying out new recipes and savoring their meals together. Now, the sight of the empty dining table brought a lump to her throat. She could almost hear the echoes of their laughter, the clinking of glasses during their many celebratory dinners. All of it felt like a cruel joke, mocking her for her foolishness. Laura's thoughts turned to her friends and family, the people who had once been her support system. They had admired her seemingly perfect life, envied her beautiful home, her devoted husband, and her social status. But now, they looked at her with pity and disdain. The whispers and sideways glances were almost unbearable. Laura's fall from grace was complete, and she had no one to blame but herself. She reached out to her closest friends, hoping for some semblance of support, but their responses were cold and distant. The betrayal they felt was palpable. They had trusted her, looked up to her, and she had shattered that trust. The gossip had spread like wildfire, and she became a pariah in her own social circle. The isolation was suffocating, and the realization that she was truly alone hit her hard. As the days turned into weeks, Laura struggled to adjust to her new reality. She moved into a small, sparsely furnished apartment, a far cry from the luxurious home she had shared with George. The stark contrast served as a constant reminder of her downfall. She had to find a way to rebuild her life, but the path forward seemed uncertain and daunting. She started looking for a job, but the stain of her public disgrace followed her everywhere. Potential employers were hesitant to hire her, and the few interviews she managed to secure ended in disappointment. The financial security she had once taken for granted was gone, replaced by a gnawing fear of the future. In her darkest moments, Laura thought about reaching out to George, hoping for some shred of forgiveness or understanding. But she knew it was futile. He had made his decision, and she had to respect that. The man she had betrayed was not the same man who had loved her unconditionally. He had become someone she barely recognized, someone who had outsmarted her at every turn. Laura also thought about Marcus, the man she had risked everything for. She realized now that he had never truly cared for her. Their affair had been based on lust and excitement, not love. He had moved on, unaffected by the chaos he had helped create in her life. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was one she had to accept if she was ever going to move forward. As she faced the lonely nights and uncertain days, Laura knew she had to find a way to make peace with her past. The road to redemption would be long and difficult, but it was the only way she could hope to rebuild her shattered life. She had to learn to live with the consequences of her actions and find a way to forgive herself for the mistakes she had made. Only then could she begin to heal and move on from the wreckage of her past. George, having exacted his revenge, began to move on with his life. He found solace in the knowledge that he had taken control of his destiny and refused to be a victim of Laura's betrayal. As he started a new chapter, he vowed never to let anyone take advantage of him again. The immediate aftermath of his revelation was a whirlwind. Friends and family, who had stood by him during his most challenging times, now rallied around him even more. Their unwavering support was a balm to his wounded heart. George spent time reconnecting with old friends, rekindling relationships that had faded over the years due to his dedication to his marriage. These bonds, he realized, were far more valuable than any material possession or fleeting romance. George threw himself into his work with renewed vigor. His career had always been a source of pride and accomplishment, but now it became a lifeline. He took on new projects, seeking out challenges that would push him to grow and evolve. His colleagues noticed the change. George was no longer the quiet, complacent man they once knew. He was now a force to be reckoned with, his determination and drive propelling him to new heights. Outside of work, George discovered new passions and hobbies that brought joy and fulfillment to his life. He joined a hiking club, relishing the peace and solitude of nature. The physical exertion and the camaraderie of his fellow hikers provided a much-needed escape from the emotional turmoil he had endured. On weekends, he took to the trails, finding solace in the rhythm of his footsteps and the beauty of the natural world around him. George also began to explore the world of art, taking up painting as a way to express his emotions. He found that the act of creating something beautiful from a blank canvas was both therapeutic and empowering. His initial attempts were tentative, but as he gained confidence, his work began to reflect his inner strength and resilience. His paintings became a visual diary of his journey, capturing the pain, the healing, and the ultimate triumph over his circumstances. In time, George felt ready to dip his toes back into the dating pool. He approached this new chapter of his life with caution, aware of the scars left by Laura's betrayal. However, he was determined not to let fear dictate his future. He met several interesting women, each one bringing a unique perspective and experience into his life. Through these interactions, George learned to trust again, to open his heart without losing himself. One woman, in particular, stood out. Linda was a kind, intelligent, and fiercely independent woman who had also experienced heartbreak. Their shared experiences created an immediate bond, and their conversations flowed effortlessly. Linda admired George's strength and resilience, while George was captivated by her compassion and zest for life. Their relationship blossomed slowly, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. As months turned into years, George and Linda's relationship deepened. They traveled together, exploring new places and creating cherished memories. Linda became a steadfast companion, her presence a constant source of joy and comfort. George found himself smiling more, laughing freely, and embracing the future with an open heart. Through it all, the pain of Laura's betrayal lingered, a shadow that occasionally darkened his thoughts. However, it no longer defined him. George had emerged from the ordeal stronger, more resilient, and determined to live life on his terms. He had learned invaluable lessons about love, trust, and self-worth, and he was grateful for the journey, painful though it had been. George's new beginning was not just about moving on from the past, but about embracing the possibilities of the future. He had rebuilt his life from the ground up, piece by piece, and in the process, discovered a version of himself he never knew existed. He was no longer a man weighed down by betrayal and heartache, but a man who had triumphed over adversity and come out stronger on the other side. His story was one of resilience, renewal, and the unwavering belief that the best was yet to come. Laura, now living in a small apartment, reflected on her choices. The once luxurious surroundings of her previous life had been replaced with modest furnishings, and the silence in her new home was deafening. The pursuit of temporary pleasure had led to her downfall. Alone and filled with regret, she began to understand the true cost of her actions. It was a hard lesson, but one she knew she had to learn if she ever hoped to rebuild her life. The early days in her apartment were the hardest. Each morning she woke up, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her chest like a physical burden. She could no longer hide behind the facade of a perfect life. The reality of her choices was stark and inescapable. The photographs and documents from George's meticulously prepared dossier haunted her thoughts. Every image, every note, was a reminder of her betrayal and the pain she had caused. Laura spent her days in quiet contemplation, seeking ways to atone for her mistakes. She realized that her affair with Marcus had been a symptom of deeper issues she had long ignored. The excitement and thrill she had sought were fleeting, and now she was left to confront the emptiness that had driven her actions. She decided to enroll in therapy, hoping to understand the deeper issues that had led her down such a destructive path. Therapy was a difficult but necessary step. Her therapist, Dr. Jacobs, was a compassionate yet firm guide through the maze of her emotions. Their sessions were intense, delving into the insecurities and dissatisfaction that had fueled her infidelity. Laura found herself confronting painful memories from her past, from unresolved childhood traumas to the gradual erosion of intimacy in her marriage. Each session peeled back another layer of her psyche, revealing truths she had long buried. Dr. Jacobs encouraged Laura to write in a journal, a daily practice that became a lifeline. She poured her heart onto the pages, chronicling her journey from the thrill of the affair to the depths of her despair. Writing allowed her to process her feelings and begin the slow work of healing. As the weeks turned into months, Laura began to find a sense of peace. She started to see her past not just as a series of mistakes, but as experiences that shaped her and from which she could learn. In addition to therapy, Laura sought ways to reconnect with the world in a meaningful way. She volunteered at a local shelter, helping those who had also lost their way. The work was humbling and provided her with a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that her pain was not unique. Everyone carried their own burdens, and by helping others, she could begin to mend her own broken heart. Laura also reached out to her estranged family. Her parents, hurt and disappointed by her actions, were initially hesitant to let her back into their lives. However, Laura's genuine remorse and commitment to change slowly rebuilt the bridge she had burned. The process was slow and fraught with difficult conversations, but it was a necessary part of her healing journey. Reconnecting with her family provided a support system she desperately needed and reminded her that forgiveness was possible, even if it had to start with herself. Laura's reflection extended to her past relationships. She wrote letters to George, not with the intention of sending them, but as a way to articulate her apologies and regrets. In these letters, she acknowledged the pain she had caused and expressed her gratitude for the good times they had shared. These letters were a cathartic release, helping her to let go of the guilt and shame that had consumed her. Slowly, Laura began to envision a future where she could make better choices. She took up new hobbies, exploring interests she had neglected during her marriage. Painting became a form of expression, allowing her to channel her emotions into something beautiful. She joined a book club, finding solace in the shared love of literature and the new friendships it brought. As the seasons changed, so did Laura. The woman who had once been driven by fleeting desires was now focused on building a life rooted in authenticity and self-awareness. She understood that the road ahead would not be easy, but she was determined to walk it with integrity. Laura's reflections had taught her that true happiness could only come from within, and she was committed to finding it, one step at a time.